Hello and welcome to another episode of Techman Talks Dynamics, specifically on the CRM and Power Platform area. Today with me I've got Ellie, I've got Zach and I've got John, all CRM and Power Platform consultants at Techman. Today's topic is storage. I'm going to say it's riveting. Probably not, but if I'm being brutally honest, it's a topic that is discussed, highlighted, raised, escalated, you could argue at times as well, time and time again. And it causes, I guess, some frustration with customers. It causes challenge as well. And ultimately, it has a cost impact to customers. So, as a starting point, let's just talk about storage itself within CRM and the Power Platform. And I'll kick off and say, in 2019, Microsoft changed kind of their structure. Storage used to just be one big pot, essentially. No matter what you put in there, kind of just record data, attachments, emails, audit, logs, it just used to be in one big pool in principle. And then in 2019, Microsoft went, hey, I know the way we can make more money. Bit of facetious comment, but I know perhaps the way that we can structure this better. And we've now got database, file, and log. And everybody's system has got those three. If you go to admin.powerplatform, you will see that you've got a level of storage, capacity, as Microsoft utilise the word, capacity, against each of those. So I suppose as a starting point, let's just recap what is database capacity. That's the first one. So for those that are listening and watching, let's just recap what database capacity actually means. Go on. So, who wants to go first?
Database capacity is all of your tables in your CRM environment, and also tables and schemas as well. So sort of the customizations in the back end. Yep. That's sort of what makes up your database capacity.
Yeah. And also your activity data as well. It's part of that.
Yeah.
So, kind of records against opportunities, leads, accounts, contacts, cases, knowledge base articles, that's records inside of the system. Yeah. That's all database.
Yeah. Data. And all your emails, appointments, tasks, etc.
Yeah. File then. So next on the list is file capacity. So sounds obvious, but what is file capacity?
It's things like your attachments. So when emails come in, if there's an attachment on there, that will go in file capacity.
Yep.
It's more sort of blob data, whatever you want to call it. It's so those sort of attached things that notes and attachments on notes.
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
Web resources as well.
Yes.
So a web resource? What's an example kind of web resource that a customer will go, okay, I've got web resources that are contributing to storage, but what's an example web resource?
I mean, if you're going to use your storage for that, you've obviously got things like JavaScript.
Yep.
And you've got things like HTML web resources.
Okay.
Obviously, those are just text, so those take up however much is
small
there.
amounts.
But you can also have things like images. So you can refer to things like, most of them are going to be icons, so fairly small, sort of 16 by 16 or 32 icons, so fairly small. But we have had systems where people want images on pages.
Yep.
I've done one recently where it's a portal, and we've actually put a web resource on the page, which is showing on the portal. So obviously that's quite a big file.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what else there are. I mean, going back, it used to be Silverlight.
That's gone now.
Yeah.
That's gone now.
But sometimes I think that's still an option in there.
So essentially, it's like Word documents, PDFs, attachments on emails, photos, videos, etc.
Yes.
That kind of concept that's been associated to records ultimately inside of the system, and then we've got log capacity, which, for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to say it's audit-based data.
Yeah. It's your audit logs. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
Audit and workflow job logs as well.
Yeah.
So when you have workflows running in the background, you get a log of that,
Yeah.
essentially, that takes up some capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of then let's recap then what Microsoft actually give you. So base, I buy a license today, a CRM license, sales, customer service, field service, whatever, and out of the box, no matter how many users I have, I get a 10 gig database capacity as a starting point. And then I also get a 20 gig file capacity as a starting limit, or I say limit, starting capacity. And then audit log, I get 2 gig. But that then, without me purchasing any more, I can then potentially get extra data added to Dataverse database capacity, depends on the type of license that I have. So am I correct in saying that if I took sales professional or customer service professional, if I had 1, 10, 50 user licenses in that area, I don't get any additional storage?
No.
But if they were sales enterprise, customer service enterprise, I do get additional aggregated, as I'll call it, storage.
250 megabytes, is it, per additional user?
Yeah.
So if I had 10 sales enterprise licenses, I'd get my 10 gig base, and I'd get essentially 10 times 250, so 2.5 additional gig,
Yeah.
which is then just added to the 10. So I have a total kind of capacity of 12.5 gig.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
You also get additional on your file storage as well.
Okay.
2 gigabytes per user. So for those 10 users, you get an additional 20 gig with your base 20, so you'll be up to 40 gig on your file. And your log storage, you get 0.
That's generous, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
Pity it's not the other way around on that.
Give away the cheap one.
250 meg on the expensive one and 2 gig on the cheaper one. We'll come on to cost towards the end.
Yes.
And yeah, as you say, log, audit, there is no additional get there. You just get your base 2 gig, but you can buy more if you really want more. So then in terms of customer insights, now according to my notes, you also get some additional storage capacity with customer insights, so journeys, aka marketing, and the old customer insights platform as well. And we'll come on to kind of interactions and stuff like that in a minute. What actually is storage in customer insights? Because the reality is that I've got account and contact data that's in my main sales customer service side. So what is data in that side of the fence? In fact, let's cover it now. What is data? We've talked about kind of different data in core CRM, as we know core CRM, but what contributes to data inside of the marketing tool?
I guess the key difference between just standard CRM and the marketing is around the insights that you get.
Yeah.
Insights are obviously what all the customers love who have marketing, as it gives them the email opens and the interactions.
Yeah.
Essentially, the sends and the interactions, that is the different data that you'll have stored as part of the customer insights dash journeys. And obviously interactions will be stored basically forever, just like anything, unless you create those bulk delete jobs to get rid of interactions after a certain period of time, just like we do for things like audit logs, for example. It's the same sort of process. If you leave interactions for 10 years, they'll stay there.
Yeah.
But realistically, you don't need them.
I suppose the only other thing in terms of storage of the marketing tool is emails, so email templates, kind of journey templates, stuff like that. So that's still contributing to storage. Obviously, most of those emails tend to be nice looking emails.
Yeah.
They've got kind of images and stuff in them as well. So there's a contribution to that. That you've got to consider of how many kind of templates you're having and what images. But then the files, my understanding is like the attach, like the if you create brochures, fact sheets, etc. that you store in like a library, I guess is what it's called, I think, in customer insights. Is that my understanding is that goes towards file storage.
Yeah.
But again, it's still an important consideration because people could have a mass kind of library of kind of marketing collateral as well that they need to consider.
Yeah.
And it's also, again, if you don't use it or don't need to use it anymore, get rid of it.
Yeah.
No, if you're not actively using it at all, why is it still there? Kind of scenario, I guess.
Yeah. As I say, the interactions data is always a good one for that, because at a certain point, say you're doing an event, you don't need to know if people have opened that email years later.
Yeah. You'll get your trend analysis after a period of time, but yeah, after a certain period, it's like conditions have changed, markets changed, what we're doing now marketing wise as an organisation has evolved, so what value does that have previously as well? Okay, so inside obviously the Power Platform and CRM, we have environments, and you can go and create different environments, but across all environments, across the tenancy, you get your 10 gig, your 20 gig, your 2 gig as your base. But I also know, as of recently, you can also do like a capacity per environment as well. Anybody know how that works? I think, from my understanding, the capacity in the environment. So you'll see now it's like a greyed out area or a grey set of text on admin.power platform, and you'll see, like, let's just say you had production environment or live environment, sandbox, test, UAT, whatever you want to call it, dev. But then you've got kind of how much you're using, but then you can say, well, how much is my limit? So what you can now do is you can now start to allocate storage against per environment. So you could say production has more against it because it should have more against it, but sandbox will have a limit. But then going on to the point of how do you structure that? Because what's the storage that if I set up a blank CRM today, roughly how big's the database, dataverse capacity it takes up out of the box without me sticking anything in it?
I think it's about 3 gig.
Okay, so 3 gig times 2 realistically as a minimum.
Yeah.
So that's 6 gig. So 6 out of my 10 is gone already before I even go live.
Yeah.
So I think the reality is that if you're going to do your capacity allocation on kind of sandbox and live, etc., you've got to make sure, yes, live gets the bigger side of it, but you can't say, oh, I only give sandbox 2 gig, because you can't, because I can't even provision it for that reason either.
You also need at least 1 gig to even create an environment in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you're out of capacity or if you're over, then you're not able to create an environment at all.
So that's quite a common problem, isn't it, really? Because we've got customers that understandably live close to the edge of their capacity, and then we will do work in sandbox, etc. first, test it, put it live. If that sandbox in CRM is quite old, it's a recommendation to make sure that that's up to date with a bit of data-wise. A minimal copy we'll talk about later on, but the idea is if we're over and it's sitting there going, I don't have a gig left, it's not going to allow me to create my sandbox. So again, that's just evolution and management of the system. It's a consideration point as well. So we've talked about kind of how the storage is structured now, what we get, what you get with your licenses, and what you don't get, importantly, with your licenses. But what are the biggest contributors to storage inside a CRM and a Power Platform, ultimately?
Activities, emails, generally emails.
Why?
Because you can't control the size. So if you have customers who are sending in emails to your inbox and you're tracking those into Dynamics, you have no control over what they're sending. So whilst a lot of the attachments are going to go into the file storage, so really that's not ever too much of a problem. It's normally the database storage that we have a problem with.
Yeah.
The actual body of that email can be surprisingly large. The amount of times when we're doing tracking of emails and people think, we'll take the body of the email and that can be this case description, and all of a sudden you've got a 100,000 capacity limit and the flow is failing because it's over that limit. because emails aren't just the text that you see. You can have a lot of HTML in there. So there can be big chunks of HTML that you've got no control over what's there. So I did a capacity report for somebody recently where we looked at the total number of emails in there and then the actual amount of data being used, and it was averaging 140k per email that was coming, that it was storing. So you do get a lot of HTML. You'll also see, and this is an interesting one, for me anyway, that when an email comes in, if you've got a signature with a picture at the bottom, and we've seen those a lot. I think the Tech Man emails have got a picture of the latest podcast at the bottom.
Yeah, you're going to see all our faces within a few days. So you're welcome.
It depends how you store that image. Yep. If you send it in a particular way, that image is an attachment which goes in your file storage. But if somebody thinks they're being clever and they'll encode the whole thing so the image is a base 64 image, which they then include in the HTML, that's then in the HTML, which is in the body, which goes in your database. So all of a sudden
you're ballooning your 154k, doubling it or even more on a single email.
Yeah, so it's information that's out of your control because it's what your customers are sending. But yes, activities are the main one.
But even what you're sending, if you then get a thread that you track the thread, and then you get colleagues respond to that thread, and that then goes into CRM as well. Yeah. Then you then kind of going even further with it as well, even if it is internal at that point in time that someone's contributed to an internal user has contributed to that thread with the customer as well.
Yeah, it's scary really how much the activity table can sort of inflate storage. We've had a customer where we looked at the amount of database capacity that was being taken up in their old CRM. So you could basically just store as much as you want, and over a period of time they had 120 gig worth of data. So shifting from 120 gig to 10, you can imagine the conversations around, storing email attachments over time. You're going to have to find a way not to, do quite as much as you did in the past.
I suppose that's not just specific to CRM. Obviously, it's a big one for Microsoft and Dynamics 365 and SaaS. But that was the world of on-premise systems, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Adding a bit of extra storage in the server, okay, you'd have to order it, you'd have to take it down, you'd have to put it in, etc. So there's a bit of maintenance and process to go back, but it's relatively easy to stick an extra bit of storage on a server realistically. Yeah. And because it was just on your server and you'd already paid for that storage, it's a case of, fill your boots.
Yeah. In
today's world, arguably, storage in certain areas, as we will come on to, is a premium. Whether it should be a premium, I disagree with, but it's a premium. It's whereas, and you've got to think about it a bit more. Whereas previously, you just didn't have to really care about it, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So emails then, emails are a big contributor in terms of the body. So the files, the attachments, etc. go into file storage. Can you limit that in terms of, for example, if someone sent I'm going to be facetious in the number here, a 3 gig or a 30 gig file, will that still go into file storage in CRM, or am I being bound by my file policies, file size policies, should I say, of my Exchange server?
I think you're bound by the file policies, and I think there's a setting in the admin where you can specify the largest size that you want.
So you've got two levels. You've got the Exchange side and you've got the CRM side as well.
Yeah. So you can limit it that way. There's other things that we can do now. We've got Power Automate. I'm currently writing a process for a customer where you can see the email coming in. You can check if it's regarding a particular type of record, which in my case I am, but you haven't got to. You can then list all the attachments, and one of the features of the attachment table is the file size. So you can look at what's there in terms of file size. So you could have something that flags up if you've had a particularly large attachment arrive, and do whatever you want to do with it. It may be that if one's come in, you want to just notify someone, just to sort it out.
Yeah.
You are still going to be bound by that limit on the policy.
Yeah.
So it's not even going to create if you're over that. But it could be if you want something that's over a particular level, you might want to do something.
So we've talked about kind of emails and tracking an email and the thread and stuff like that. But a great feature of CRM, but thinking about storage specifically, a challenging feature of CRM is surely queues then. Because you're attaching your emails or your mailboxes into a queue. And no matter what comes in that mailbox, it's going into CRM.
Yeah.
So if you're getting junk emails, someone's got essential sales at or a help at and you're getting junk come in because someone once upon a time signed up for that email and that newsletter and says, I don't want it going through to jason.tromans, I'll send it to sales at and they can have it instead and I'll read it when I want to read it. That's still going into CRM. Because in principle, you connect a mailbox to CRM and no matter what goes in that mailbox, it all goes into. So how do I even filter out make sure I filter out that rubbish and it doesn't stop in my CRM system as such, because there's clearly genuine queue items from emails, and we'll talk about how long we keep emails in a little bit, but then there's actual not genuine emails that are not relevant to CRM. What do I do in that scenario? Because we've had it before where we've done project. I can think of one we did a couple of years ago that we had a project, customer service, and the amount of spam and junk that was still getting through irrespective of their filters on Exchange was still high and it was still coming into CRM.
Yeah.
So again, is it then down to record creation rules? If it doesn't match it, then that sits there and then click delete manually out of the queue. Is that our answer?
We've had this with a customer. I had to do a storage report maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, where we were looking at this, and they did have the queues coming in. Everything was coming in. There were record creation rules, I think, or they were certainly attaching it to the record. But if it comes in and does not have that record creation, does not go through that automatic record creation rule, you're not going to have it attached to a record. So you're going to find that email is going to come in, but the regarding is going to be blank. Now, in situations like that's a prime one to look for. In this particular instance, we had a policy where if it had a regarding, we did nothing with it. It stayed. If the regarding was blank, we were doing things with it. We were looking at getting rid of it after a certain amount of time.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that would be the only thing you could look at is the regarding filled in. You could then also look, I suppose, at adding in rules to say if it contains this, if it's to this, if it's from this. But that's difficult to manage and problematic in terms of making sure you capture everything, because again, you're relying on the data that the customer or your external person has said. And any mistake on that, which you have no control over, you're then trying to apply rules on that information, which we've all seen this in the past. And it's hard. It's very difficult to do.
Any other big contributors to storage? Outside of kind of activities?
I think, audit logs are one that, do spring up. People may have audit logs that they, retain for, they want to retain forever.
The default is forever as well when you actually enable auditing, so...
Yeah, so that is definitely something to monitor, because over time you'll end up going over your audit log, essentially. But people usually create sort of a reoccurring
bulk delete job
after, a set period that's agreed. But that's definitely one that if you don't keep your eye on it, you will walk into being over your audit log storage.
And the basic setup of CRM doesn't help with that, because when you create any new columns, by default, enable auditing is ticked. So it will always go in there. The moment you audit it, every single change is in there. So it almost needs a job after a few months of seeing what's actually useful in this audit log and turning off the fields that you may not, you no longer need. And again, we've done that with other customers where the audit log was just absolutely chock-a-block. And when you look at it, we don't need that, we don't need that. So, it's a small task after you've gone live, a sort of post-go live, a few months after everything's settled down, to realise what you actually want to keep and switch off the bits that you don't.
Do you know, what I also sometimes, it kind of, I'm not saying forget about it, but it bypasses you a little bit, which contributes to the size of storage. Now, again, any record that you get into the hundreds of thousands of records, etc., obviously it's going to contribute towards storage, but tens of thousands of records are still probably, if it's just flat data, it's still kind of in your megabytes, realistically, not your gigs. But your dataverse search and indexing, and then obviously how many tables you turn on and how many fields you turn on for dataverse search. Obviously we talk about that little search bar on the top in CRM. Don't worry about putting your kind of wildcard anymore. Don't worry about it. The system's clever enough to do it. And then people start searching, and then during your UAT and go, I can't find that. And go, well, we need to add the table in to make sure we can find that record. Oh, yeah, okay, no, right, add that table in, add that table in, add that table in, add that table. Before you know it, you've got almost every table in CRM and all the custom tables that the customer wants. And then, obviously, it's indexing itself and updating itself all the time when new data goes into it. So that alone is growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the idea is that search seems great to be able to try and find something. But then you realise how much it's going through to index to then try and return the answer. I don't think we probably emphasise enough of that has an impact as well. We just say, yeah, we'll turn that on. Of course we can. But then it's just remember that it's indexing itself.
It impacts it from a usability perspective as well, because having too many fields enabled for search doesn't make the search any better.
No. It's the quick find as well inside of the record as well. I know that's kind of not so much storage principle here, but the usability and speed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You want to get something that returns the answer quickly for you as a user. So okay, then we're kind of starting to kind of mould into what we're doing to deal with storage, and we've come to the conclusion that comes back around again. Activities are probably one of the biggest areas, or the biggest area, commonly of storage, especially from a dataverse side of things. So what do we do then? What do we do to reduce? In the principle, we'll start with the principle is we're not buying any additional storage as it stands right now. So what do we do? Where do we go? How should we approach of kind of keeping our database within storage capacity limits that we've got?
I think the first thing you should probably consider looking at is how many sandbox environments that you have. Do you need more than one sandbox environment? And also what's in that sandbox environment?
Yep.
Because, a lot of the time, if we're doing some work for a customer, we might need an up-to-date copy of Live into a sandbox environment, but we don't necessarily need to keep that just sat there forever. We also had a customer quite recently where they had some ARC rules, record creation rules, and queues, and they actually created a copy of their mailbox, their sales app mailbox, and they didn't realise that when they went live, that was still running in Sandbox, so all of their emails were going into Sandbox and Live, taking up, so much storage. So it's just being mindful about how many Sandbox environments you have.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep your Sandbox environment, you can do a minimal copy. So rather than keeping all of the records and everything in your Sandbox environment, you can just have a minimal copy, which is just the sort of customizations that you have. Another thing to consider as well is Sandbox environments obviously take up storage, but trial and developer environments don't. They don't actually take up any storage. So just being mindful of the types of environments that you have, really.
Developer environments are, whilst even if you're an admin as such like that, or you can see your three environments. If Jason or Ellie or Zach or John had a developer environment, that is specific to me though, in terms of I'm not going to be able to get in and share my stuff with somebody in a developer environment. The idea is with developers, it's my little playground as such like that, so I can kind of do what I want in principle. I'm not really provision myself a proper dataverse inside of that.
But if you wanted to test something.
But if you wanted to test some flows, or you wanted to test a concept or a logic, then absolutely. If it's in isolation, absolutely developer environments. But again, don't just create it and leave it there. You just still go and delete it just for maintenance purposes as well, is what I'll probably say. Trials, yes. Sometimes though, here's the one on storage. I've seen this before, someone takes a CRM trial, then starts paying for it and converts it into production when the trial's over, but then it depends on how they had that trial, it's got all the setup and data and demo data in there as well, and all of a sudden you've still got a level of, might be minimal, but you've still got a level of storage. And the trial as well typically provisions everything in terms of like loads of kind of Microsoft Dynamics 365 solutions in the background that may or may not be relevant to the apps that you're using. So you're sitting there going, we talked about kind of 2.5, 3 gigs your base, but if it's trialing and throwing everything at you, it could arguably be slightly higher than that as well. So you sit there going, converting from trial. So whilst the trial doesn't actually contribute to it, if you converted from trial, you want to make sure that you don't necessarily go and stick a load of noise in on top that actually you're not going to use for the foreseeable future either. So what else do we do? Sandbox environments then. Don't have too many. Clean it up. Don't leave them there. Go on. What's next?
Bulk delete.
Bulk delete on what?
Emails. It's rarely solved by one bulk deletion job. I would say that you need to have a bulk deletion job when the regarding does not contain data. So in theory, that's junk. Yeah. And depending on what your feelings are as a company, you could have that run within a couple of weeks, couple of months, or however long you want it to do. But generally, that is emails that aren't linked to anything, so they're not appearing in anybody's timeline. They're not really of any use. If it is of any use, hopefully you'd think in the first sort of few weeks of it arriving, you would have tracked it to the correct record.
Yeah.
So if it's not tracked with anything, then it can go. So you find you can have a bulk delete job that runs against emails where the regarding doesn't contain data. You could then have another bulk deletion job that runs against information where it does contain data. So this is relevant information, but you're probably looking at a much longer time span. So that first one would be, if it's over 2 weeks, 2 months old, if it does contain data, that's stuff that is on the timeline that is relevant. But you might also say, do I need to keep emails beyond 3 years, 7 years to get rid of it like that? But there's always going to be a level of storage that you need to keep. So when those emails first arrive, assuming your flow of emails coming in is constant, you're going to need to have that bulk of email between them arriving and being deleted that aren't regarding anything. Obviously, reduce the time span, your storage goes down. Yeah. And then also the ones that you want to keep. Chances are that is going to keep expanding.
If you remove the email and multi-delete the email, does it remove the email out of Dataverse database capacity, and would it also remove the associated attachment files as well?
Yes.
So if you delete it, it looks in the two areas, which file is as your blob and Dataverse is database.
Yep.
It would still look back and go, because it is a related piece of data to that email, I'm just going to go, okay, I'll take that away and throw it in the bin.
Gets rid of it, yeah. It's also important to remember that even though you're deleting it from Dataverse, you will still have it in Exchange.
As long as you've got retention policies on your Exchange mailboxes.
Yeah. So if you did need to go back to something from a really long time ago, it would still be there as long as it's kept there. Because effectively the emails in Dynamics are a copy of what you've got in Exchange.
Yes. And importantly as well, again, if I had sent an email to Ellie, to Zach, to you, and you were all in CRM, and they replied, it would make a copy of the email against Ellie, Zach, and you. So it's not just the email being stored once either. If you're in CC and there's multiple contacts on that same thread, it is stored multiple times.
Yeah. So again, that's another bulk deletion you could have in, that if the two contains, I guess it would be if the email contains your domain name as an @, or it's from a user, and your from is also from a user, so it's an email, maybe that can also be removed.
So you can probably get you can get relatively specific on your bulk delete job logic.
Yeah. When it comes to emails, there's almost never, I would say, that one bulk delete job will do the job. You need to have several working together to get rid of the different types of emails.
I know you're going to tell me, well, it depends on the customer and it depends on the situation. So I don't want you to answer that. But how long is an acceptable period of time to be keeping emails?
Depends on the customer.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
No, that's not an acceptable answer.
I mean, the one that I was talking about, they are a medical company. There is a compliance and a regulatory factor that needs emails to be kept for a good 7 years.
Okay.
But whereas if you're dealing with a sales environment, not so much. Yeah. So I'd probably say to get rid of your sort of unrelated emails, the ones that aren't linked, I would put a month out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you haven't needed it in that first month of that email coming in, are you going to need it? Yeah. And worst case, you retrack it again from Outlook.
Yeah, I think, as you say, regulatory compliance is a good marker. And then you also have some customers that have warranties. Yeah. So warranties is also a good marker. You know, if you've got something that is, you know, under warranty for 7 years, after that, it can go, essentially.
But I suppose my point is, if someone creates a case and warranty claim, you might say, if it was a case record that might now need a field service work order or something, or you return it and get a different one, etc. You go through that example, the case comes in, gets logged, if they logged it through email, back and forwards, etc. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Shouldn't there be an appropriate amount of information now on the case record, meaning that actually that email is now pointless because I've taken the core of what the principle of that email was, and the case record gives me I had a warranty claim on this date, this was the outcome, this is what we did, I had tasks, I had general notes, etc. Why would I go and relate back to the original email that was sent at 5:23 on a Saturday afternoon by the customer?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it depends on the customer, but I know that...
that's again, depends on the customer.
The actual companies typically will attach, you know, some sort of agreement, or, you know, if they delete the email that's got the agreement on it of the warranty, pretty big problem if you just delete that and get rid of that reference. I think that's the key one that they always want to refer to, the initial agreement that they can say, you know, you're arguing against this warranty, here's this email.
And again, that's a valid in terms of, that's, if you think about just cost of storage then for a second, you go, well, that's just a cost of storage. That it's important to our business, it's important to our operation, the regulatory compliance, it's important to our business, and that's our cost of doing business, essentially, from that perspective. Obviously, I'm playing devil's advocate going, I'll keep them just in case. No. The idea is, if you want to do your behaviour and trend analysis and stuff like that, that's what the records inside of CRM are for. Because my time in sales and account management years gone by, I used to be that user once upon a time that just used to go track, cover my backside, track, cover my backside. Did I ever really go in and open that email again? No. And Tapman used to historically have had a huge amount of storage in our own system that we've paid Microsoft money for. So again, it's don't just see it as I'll cover my backside kind of process either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a case of there's some records I sit there going, how long should you keep them?
Yeah. I think utilise SharePoint where you can as well.
In what way?
So, for example, as you said about a case coming in and they've got some sort of agreement attached to the email, you know, you could store that attachment against the case in SharePoint, so you can still access it from the case. You can put all of the information from the email into the case description and you still have access to it. And obviously with SharePoint you get a lot more storage than you do with Dynamics. So it's just being mindful and utilising SharePoint where possible.
I suppose the only thing with that though is if you move certain things out of the timeline at this point in time, out the emails and the attachments, from that side of the fence, is that you're kind of looking in a different place to see what was going on. So opposed to looking in my timeline and seeing my chronological order of kind of that's what happened, potentially I've either got to click the Files Documents tab, or I've got to have a subgrid on the main thing going, okay, well, what was there?
Yeah.
In the right scenarios, absolutely agreed. There is absolute kind of relevance for it.
Yeah.
But I guess from a customer's perspective, you've got to also understand that it's a slightly different experience as well. And it's that trade-off versus the cost of the storage.
I was about to say,
versus the slightly different experience that you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So bulk delete jobs are quite common then. Again, files, removed attachments, etc. I talked about, I even say workflows, you mentioned the workflow logs and stuff like that should be reduced. Log, again, quite commonly, I think audit log, people that you've already mentioned it, just bulk delete the log. The reality is, how long do you really want to keep?
And the successful workflow jobs as well. So when a workflow runs and is succeeded, you don't really need to keep that in your storage. You may as well get rid of it.
No, you don't. Marketing, you spoke about kind of deleting the interactions
Yeah.
as well after a period of time. So
Yeah.
what's the value in that as well long
Exactly,
term?
yeah.
So in terms of, you got bulk delete jobs is a system job. Yeah. So you don't need to go. You need to go and configure what the bulk delete job does, but that's just has been a native part of CRM since pretty much day dot. But Power Automate, you mentioned Power Automate a few times about kind of managing kind of storage and stuff like that. So why would we use Power Automate as a workflow kind of tool opposed to a bulk delete job? Is it a case of it's helping move stuff one place to another?
Yeah.
In principle, that's what we're using Power Automate for.
Yeah. So I'm doing a project at the moment where the emails that are going to come in are going to have large attachments.
Okay.
And they're all going to have large attachments. So one of the things that we're doing with that is we're running it so email arrives.
Yep.
I'm checking, is it linked to a case?
Yep.
Does it have attachments on there? And I'm also filtering it by those attachment sizes.
Yeah.
So if it's over, because obviously we've all seen at the bottom, you get your little logo at the bottom of an email. If it's included, that's going to be part of your. That's also going to be an attachment, but that's likely to be less than 100k. So when you look at the amount of file storage you got, that's not going to be huge. So
Yeah.
I'm filtering these down where the attachment size is greater than a particular byte size.
Okay.
And we'll have to figure out what that one is. When you've done that, you can then go through the attachments. I'm doing some of this checking. Do we have a SharePoint folder?
Yeah.
If we don't, we create one
Yeah.
and provide all the links to it. I will then create a folder for that particular email, which that challenges in itself because the email might have things like RE colon.
Yeah.
And of course, you try and do a folder with a colon in.
Yeah.
Doesn't like it.
Yeah,
So I've got to try and modify it. And I've actually got to the point I've just got to put email received and then the date so I know what it's structured. And even then I started doing it with a slash, didn't like that. So I've got to use hyphens. And then just basically taking each of those attachments, converting the data, and it took a while to work out, into the correct base 64 converter
Yeah.
to then create the file and then delete the file from the email.
Yeah.
So it's
Because
one of those
obviously how
things-
the message is stored inside a CRM is
Yeah.
not a typical way of
No.
you'd expect an Outlook message to be.
But then it's also one of those that if you've got that HTML, there's no reason as well if you're using SharePoint that you couldn't take or format an HTML document
Yeah.
where you're looking at the to, the from, the subject, the date,
Yeah.
just format it in a table, and then the actual bulk of it, you could just take the HTML as it arrives,
Yeah.
bung it in there, and upload that email as a PDF or an HTML file.
I love that term, bung it in there.
Well, yes. Carefully place it in the same folder so that as an email comes in, you may just have a quick record to say, maybe even delete the email and said no, and add a note instead to say email, and here's the link to the folder in SharePoint that can go in, and then that loads up. You can then see the email body, and you can see all the attachments that are there as files within that folder. So that's one way of doing it. So effectively, that takes the email out of the system completely and just replaces it with a note, which is a little bit of text.
With a link, basically.
With it, yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of. I think there's clearly another. Obviously, starting to wrap up. There's third-party tools out there as well. Yeah. CRM add-ons have got one. I think Enogic have got one. Got an AppSource there. There's a few out there.
There's one called Shrinky, is there?
Yeah, Shrinky or Shrink It or something like that. I think it is. But it's pretty much doing all the same thing, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
It's either moving it from one place to another, either sticking it in SharePoint, sticking it in an Azure blob area. So I think they're much, or you can use Power Automate to do something similar, which is kind of a one-off kind of cost, I guess, versus a product cost. And it's a case of how far does that product go in the future? Well, it's a mixed kind of argument, I guess, from that side of the fence.
It's whichever way you want to go. I mean, chances are that if we write a Power Automate that does it, what you get is what you get.
Yeah.
If you've got a product, a third-party tool, you'll get updates. If
Yes.
things change. It will be.
Yep.
You'll get advantages from that. I'd probably say you get more features in that than Power Automate, but that's because you're paying for it on an ongoing basis.
I suppose how far with features can you go at this moment in time with something like that as well, I guess,
Yeah.
is one of those. There's also a kind of data retention policy process that you can do on the Power Platform, which kind of, in my best way of describing it, zips up you choose a range, you choose some tables, records, etc., and activities or cases, etc., and it just compresses it. In my simple way of describing it, zips it, leaves it in the database, but as a user, you could try and click on that record you can't open it. It's saying sorry, it's not there. So it's basically just you've zipped up, you've compressed an amount of storage on a given range of data, and it will sit there in the background. Is the best way of describing it. We haven't tried it yet in terms of then unzipping it in terms of the background and putting it in a data warehouse. You can't change your mind. From what we can see, you can't just go, oh, bad idea, I want those cases back, and then just go reverse it. Just go, no, you're done. So the user can't now open that record, so it's got to be dealt with outside of CRM per se. So I think there's a few, but I think we've concluded that emails are the big one, realistically. And there's a few different ways to do it, but there's also other general maintenance areas as well. Environments, logs, workflow logs, interactions, general records as well. Just again, at some point, really old records, if it's not relevant anymore. I'm not saying a case or a lead, but the idea is it's a custom table with a record. If it's years old, and it might say 500 meg, it might say 500 meg, I guess. But then cost of storage, because it's Christmas, let's finish on, I won't say it was a gift. I'm going to be bar humbug. So, any idea how much a Dataverse database capacity additional license costs?
I just know that it's expensive.
Is it £32?
So yeah, apart from your pennies, £32.90 per additional 1 gig of database Dataverse capacity that you want. So that's ridiculously expensive. Now, sometimes there is a value to paying that cost. Techman pay that cost, so I'm not sitting here going, saying it and then we don't have to incur it at Techman, because we do, because there's value in our data that means that we pay the fee. But there has to be good reason and structure and strategy of why we do it. Dataverse file capacity, any idea how much that costs? I'm referring to my notes here.
It's about £2.
Yeah, £1.64. So as you said at the start, yeah, you get 20 gig of your file to start off with, and you get 10 gig of that one. Oh, by the way, if you want more of the 20 gig one, yeah, that's cheap as chips. Whereas your 10 gig, or that's more. And then your Dataverse log capacity, any idea how much an additional gig of that is?
Tenner.
Just short of tenner, £8.20.
Okay.
But reality is, how many people actually go and buy additional log storage? It's file or it's database.
Yeah.
And if it's out of the two, it's really database. Microsoft do have a tier, and I can't remember the exact number, because at SMB level you wouldn't get to this. It's like you can drop down, it saves like $10 or six quid less or something like that, 6-7 quid less. I think it's like if you buy like 1,000 gig. Yeah. Storage is a challenge on Business Central as well, but I'm going to sit there and Business Central have got a more favourable storage model than CRM and Power Platform have. And if there's one thing that the likes of people at Microsoft need to take note of, is they need to find a better way of making it more palatable. Because create bundles, create 5 gig bundles, 10 gig bundles. I'm not saying it needs to be cheap as chips at the end of the day, but the reality is it needs to be better priced than what it is. But unfortunately, it's been like this for a while. Do I see it changing anytime soon? Probably not. But it's also the cost of data, and it's the cost of the value of your data. And are Microsoft the only company that does this? Absolutely not. So I'm moaning, but actually the competitors out there do very similar things as well. So Microsoft know the competitors do it, they can do it, and it's just the way of being on a SaaS platform. So anything else that you want to say about storage?
Well, I think it's important, really, with storage, with customers anyway, to be sort of proactive from the start and just, if you're going to turn on audit logs, go through the whole, you need to set up your delete jobs. Same with the attachments. It's just being proactive, really. rather than reactive, because no customer's going to react well to, by the way, we forgot to tell you that data, the storage you've got is 10 gig. You know, it's just that. And also from the customer side of things, it's being realistic with the data.
Yep.
Do you need to keep this data? Obviously, from compliance point of view, yes. But, you know, a lot of customers may be in the habit of, we just keep everything. Whereas that is just not going to be the case nowadays.
Yeah.
The way that the Dataverse storage is set up.
Yeah, it's traditionally one of these things that doesn't have to be part of the project.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's like a sting in the tail, that you can actually go through the project and not worry about it.
Yeah.
And then 3, 6, 12 months down the line, then the inefficiency of what you're storing can come out. But let's look at it, spin it as a positive.
Yeah.
It's tasks you haven't got to do as part of the project. You can extend your project budget with your manager to be able to look at it afterwards. So it's a task that hasn't got to be done as part of those initial go live phases. You can then have a look at it when you're all happy using your shiny new system, working out what you need to do.
But don't push the can down the road too far.
No, you need
realistically,
you need to do it.
You've got to be aware, and as
Just
part of the
awareness.
implementation, you've got to understand the implications of what storage is.
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, thank you, John. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you to all those listening, and we'll see you soon again on another Techman Talks Dynamics.